we are wrapping up our series in the book of Ruth. So, now, some of us have been here the whole time, and if you were here the whole time, this is all going to be very familiar for you. If you weren't here the whole time and you're jumping in, this may feel like you're kind of in the deep end without floaties for a minute, because chapter 4 is really hinging, and you heard me say this last week, on chapter 3. Like, you've got to have chapter 3 to understand chapter 4, and you got to have chapter 4 to really understand chapter 3. Because at Ruth chapter 3, our man Boaz and Ruth, they met on the threshing room floor. She asked him to to basically marry her. And maybe you think, oh, that's weird. Like maybe in our society it's weird, but not in the ancient times. So it's one of those normal things. And afterwards, Boaz says, I would love to, but hold on, there's somebody else I got to talk to. And so he goes and decides he's going to go talk to this other person. And we learned last week about the importance of doing the right thing, right? I mean, we talked about doing the right thing, not just doing what we feel is comfortable or what we want to do, but actually doing the right thing as it relates to God and his commandments. That's the key part. Can't just be, this is my right, and because right is subjective sometimes in some people's view, but it's not, where it's according to what God says. So in week one, we did this 3 weeks ago, we learned that it's time to leave Moab, that sometimes we have to walk away from accepted sin. We saw that when Naomi and Ruth left the cursed place of Moab, and they walked away from the place that was rejecting God and moved to a place of accepting God in Judah. So we saw that in week one, and we learned that, hey, sometimes we have got to walk away from accepted sin. As uncomfortable as the phrase is, and uncomfortable as that S word is in the church, that sometimes we have to walk away from accepted sin. And then in week 2, we learned that there's no accidents, right? It's no accident that this happened a certain way, that God is actually lining things up, as we saw, what I like to call divine appointments, God working in the background. And that's the whole premise of this series, is God working in the ordinary, not just God working in the extraordinary, right? In the extraordinary, where he's splitting the Red Sea and there's a fire on Mount Carmel, but he also works in the ordinary. And then again, last week we learned that sometimes we have to do the right thing. And if you remember, last week I kind of left you with the application piece was do the right thing, ... and I didn't complete the sentence because I really need chapter 4 to be able to complete the sentence. And again, it's going to be a little challenging today. It's going to be a little uncomfortable for just a moment. But if we can engage with it, we will be able to see God working in the ordinary of our life more and more than what we currently do. So we're going to be finishing this out in Ruth chapter 4. We're going to start right away in verse 1. So if you have your Bibles, and you guys hear me say this all the time, bring your Bible, bring it on your phone, bring it on your iPad, bring your physical Bible. I don't care how you bring a Bible and follow along in the Bible so you can make notes. So Ruth chapter 4, starting in verse 1. When you're there, somebody shout word. Word of the Lord says this: Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. You guys remember last week? What happened was Ruth meets Boaz on the threshing room floor. When she meets him on the threshing room floor, she says, marry me. He says, time, girl, I'd love to. You're pretty and you smell great, but there's actually somebody who has the right as a guardian redeemer to own the property and to marry you. So as much as I would like to marry you right now, I actually can't. I need to do the right thing and go talk to this guy first. And then chapter 3 ends with Ruth and Boaz and Naomi walking into the city. That's it. It ends with them walking into the city to meet with this guardian redeemer. Now, in this verse, it says guardian redeemer, but in the Hebrew translation, it really translates to something like Mr. So-and-so. The English translations put it here so we know we're talking about the same person that he referenced in chapter 3, but the Hebrew really says Mr. So-and-so. They don't even give him a name. He doesn't get a name at all, just so-and-so. So they were sitting down at the town gate, which is, it's a covered gate going into the city, probably Bethlehem, because it's one of the closer ones there. Going in, and this is where business transactions took place. This is where legal proceedings took place. Because if you remember, there's no king in Jerusalem yet. There's no king in Israel yet. This is the time of the judges, where the judges ruled. So they would do things on a tribal or local level rather than a top-down level at the country level. So this was different for them. From what we're used to. Everything happened with the elders locally. So they would meet in this tiny little spot because they didn't have a town hall or anything like that. They would meet at the covered gate because it would provide cover from the sun because it's hot there, and they would kind of hash out these business dealings. And there were elders who were either religious leaders or business leaders or people that were kind of influence in the city would meet under this covered gate. That's where business decisions and legal decisions were made. And this is the scene. You know, the sun's rising, they're going to the gate. Boaz sees Mr. So-and-so, and he says, come over here, my friend, and sit down. And so Mr. So-and-so went over and sat down. And when Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. So he's gathering everybody, right? He's like, come on, guys, I got a problem. I need to figure it out. Got something we want to say. I need the elders because it's a legal matter. So let me get them and let me get, kind of Mr. So-and-so. We'll sit down and we'll talk about it. And then he said to Mr. So-and-so, Naomi has come back from Moab. You remember Naomi? And he's like, oh, yeah, I remember Naomi. She married my cousin Elimelech. I remember that. Oh, yeah, I remember Naomi. And Boaz goes, well, Naomi's returning from Moab. She returned from Moab a little while ago. You remember that? He goes, yeah, I heard something about that. And she's actually selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Now, she is a female at that day and age, couldn't inherit the land. She needed a man to have the land. So that's just the way they operated in that culture. So she couldn't inherit the land, but she could sell the land for an amount. She had the ability to do that. And that is when the option of the guardian redeemer comes in place. Somebody related to her dead husband could, brother, cousin, so on and so forth, could redeem that land and also receive Ruth. This is what he does. And so Boaz brings it in. He says, look, I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, meaning if you will go ahead and take the property, because remember, he hasn't said anything about Ruth yet. He's talking just money and property. Because in that day and age, property equals money. So that's all he's thinking is money and wealth and influence. That's it. He says, so if you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. And so Mr. So-and-so says, I will redeem it. Now, you got to imagine, Naomi and Ruth are kind of distraught at this now because they were going with the expectation, like Ruth and Boaz had been out in the field, they'd been working together, they'd spent time together. They were supposed to hitch up, like they were going to get married. That was what was supposed to happen in her mind. She even goes and asks him, are we going to get married? And he's like, yes, I'd love to. So this is the expectation. And now can you imagine how she feels when Boaz is describing the situation to Mr. So-and-so and never brings her up? He doesn't bring her up at all. He brings up just the property. And you got to imagine Ruth is like, what are you doing? You got to tell him that, like, I'm part of the deal. You can't tell him that it's just the property. No, you can't do that. And then, of course, this man, who's a wealthy businessman, is going to accept the opportunity to get the property, because he's going to acquire more wealth and he's going to have more property. So, of course, he wants to do that. And you got to imagine Ruth and Naomi are like, what are you doing, Bo? Stop it. Like, come on, you got to pay attention here. And so you got to imagine also how they feel when she's expecting Boaz to be the guy, right? Like she's going to marry Boaz. And then all of a sudden this guy says, I'll redeem it. What? That was not the fairy tale ending. That was not how we wrote it up when she was on the threshing room floor with Boaz. That was not how they planned it. It was not supposed to happen that way. And then our man Bo did not help at all with the way he presented the argument. So, like, what are you doing is probably what they're thinking, because all you're talking about is the money. And so he says, I will redeem it. And then I think Bo is having some fun here. I think Boaz is having some fun here. Because after the guy says, I will redeem it, he says, I will redeem it, getting the property. Boaz said to him, okay, well, that's great. Fantastic. On the day you receive the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. Also, whoops, didn't notice that. The dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. Now, at this time, the Mr. So-and-so, he said, whoa, then I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. And then he says to him, you redeem it yourself, for I cannot do it. Now, we read this in our century, and it's really hard to grasp what's happening culturally because we're so far removed from it, and the author is in the culture when he's writing it. So for him, it's all normal. It's not anything different. But for us, it's difficult. It's like if you were writing about how you send a text message to your mom, and then you take that and you give it to somebody that doesn't have an iPhone one day, they're going to be like, what is a text message? That's kind of what we're looking at here. We just don't understand the cultural norms that they understand. So what he's talking about here, and the reason he rejects it is because of what's expected if he does indeed redeem the land. If he redeems the land, and according to Leviticus 25, he also is required to marry Ruth because she's still of childbearing age. And then, according to Leviticus, he's required to give her an heir. And when he gives her an heir, that son becomes a child of Elimelech, not Mr. So-and-so. So he will carry the name of Elimelech, Mahlon, Ruth's husband. So right away, she's like, okay, he's like, hold on a second. And then this guy also, if he's born, would receive property. So it makes zero sense for Mr. So-and-so. He gains nothing financially because if he takes the property, he marries Ruth. He then has to give Ruth an heir. Ruth's heir doesn't carry his name, and Ruth's heir is then entitled to the property that he just took. He didn't make out at all. And now he's got more mouths to feed, and he's got 2 wives. Like, ain't nobody signing up for that, right? Like, come on, it's hard enough. So it's like, we're not doing that at all. And he says, I can't do that because then he's putting his estate at risk because now he's got another blood son. And so maybe his kids that he had with his first wife might lose their inheritance because this guy wants to come in and take it. And he has an equal claim just like they do. Well, this now causes a big issue for him. And it's the whole reason he says, nope, no thank you. No thank you whatsoever. To put it in perspective, it's kind of like, gentlemen, if your brother died, right? Your brother dies. When your brother dies, you get to inherit his land because you're next in line. And you're like, heck yeah, man, he had a big farm. He had lots of property. I'm all about it. Yeah. And then they go, but you need to take his wife too. Nah. Right? And if you're married, the answer is absolutely not, right? I'm not doing that. And then if you've got all these strings attached to it of like, and you have to have a child with her, and he's going to get the land anyway, you're like, oh, hold on, that's not something I want to do whatsoever. Like, I'm not interested in that at all. So that's the environment that Mr. So-and-so looks at and says, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that. And then you see our man Bo and why he structured it that way. He structured it that way so the guy would think all property, and then when he introduces Ruth, he's like, hold on, that changes everything. That changes everything. And so that's the environment that we're in. So then the guardian redeemer, Mr. So-and-so, says to Boaz, buy it yourself. And then he removed his sandal. Now again, this is a cultural thing where you read that and you're like, what's happening? Right? You read chapter 3 and you're like on the threshing room floor, and then it's like, all right, I'll redeem it. And then take your sandal off. Like, what is he doing here? This is also a cultural thing. This is called one of the sandal exchange ceremonies, the sandal ceremony. And what they would do in the first century, or in not the first century, before that, what they would do is they would take their sandal off. They didn't have parchment and paper. They didn't do contracts like that. If you were going to have a contract with somebody or you're going to sign up with a business deal with somebody in this day and age, you sat down, you met at the gate, you had the elders gather around, and then you were like, I'm going to buy 10 acres from you, and you're going to give me X amount of acres from your property. And it's like, okay, cool. So this is what we're going to do. And then as a symbol, they would take their sandals off and they would exchange the sandal, just similar to what we would do with a handshake today, except I don't know why they had to do it with sandals, but they would exchange sandals. And then we don't know what happens after that. I don't know if the guy walked around with mismatched sandals. I don't know if they gave him back. I don't know if it's like, take it, put it on, and then you got athlete's foot. I don't know. So we just know we have the record of them exchanging sandals. And so they would exchange sandals, and that's what's expected. Now, funny enough, this is in Leviticus. You can look it up. I didn't believe it until I actually looked it up. There's actually a ceremony for when a widow is rejected redemption. So when she's rejected redemption, so if a widow approaches the next of kin and she says, look, my husband died and your next of kin, your cousin, your brother, your whomever, you can redeem the land and you ought to redeem the land. It was not required. It was expected, but it was not required by the law. So you didn't have to accept her and the redemption of the land and property and name. So what they would do is if you rejected her and there was nobody else to redeem her, then she got to take your sandal off and hit you in the face with it. Not making it up. It's in the Bible. That's what it was. They would hit you in the face. They would hit him in the face with it, and then it was like a sign of disgrace right away. That was the whole point of it. Now, ladies, when you ask him to marry you and he says no, hit him with the sandal and try again. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. So the guardian redeemer takes his sandal off. They do the sandal exchange. It becomes a whole exchange. It becomes real. It becomes part of it, right? And so then it has become official. It's done. Legally, it's done. It's done in the presence of elders. And then Boaz turns and he announces to the elders and to all the people, because remember, he's inside of the town gate. So people are going in and out. I guess this is a public area. And he looks and he says, today you are my witnesses. And I think he points to everybody and says, that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. So her husband and 2 sons. And I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. He says, today you are my witnesses. This is a public act. This is a full-on public act. And he looks at everybody and he says, she's my wife. That's what he does. He just looks at everybody when they're coming in and says, we're married. That's what he does. Now, I'll take a sidebar for just a second. So we're going to take Ruth, and we're going to set it over there on the shelf for just a second. Now, I've got to get on, I'm not going to stay on the soapbox very long, but I'm going to be here for just a second. This was a marriage that happened in front of witnesses, and he even says, these are my witnesses. All across the Bible, cover to cover, you see marriage happening in the presence of witnesses, because it's expected to happen in the presence of witnesses, because God blesses the union, the marriage union. So when this happens, it's expected that it happens publicly in front of witnesses. Now, I have heard before as a pastor, people say, why do I need to get married legitimately? I mean, God knows my heart. He knows that I love her. He knows that I love him. Why does God want me to actually get married with, come on, the courts? Like, I used to hear this, a piece of paper doesn't mean I love him. A piece of paper doesn't mean I love her. You're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that at all, and that's not the point. The point is the covenant relationship and commitment in front of witnesses. It's not about love at that point. Nobody's doubting that somebody loves somebody. It's that it's a covenant relationship expected between a man and a woman, that it's the expectation. And it's got to happen in front of a witness. Okay, Brandon, but hold on. It's awfully old school, and I'm not comfortable with it. And I thought this was one of them new, hip, and happening churches, right? And I don't know about all that, but what happens, right, I've heard this before. What happens if we're on a desert island and there's nobody else there, and it's just her and it's just me, and we love each other and whatever? Like, what happens then? Can I just be married before God then? Absolutely. But you're not on a desert island. You're not. In fact, if you're having a conversation with me and asking that question, you're not on a desert island, because I'm there too. And I, luckily for you, can marry in all 50 states and all desert islands that I know of. So we can do it right there, right? We can do it right there. So my point is, and I've heard a wise pastor say this, and this was so challenging the first time I ran into it, was because the idea of the marriage union, this is why Paul uses it as an example between Jesus and the church. It's a union designed to glorify God. That's what the marriage union is supposed to do. And when something's happening outside of the marriage union, it's not glorifying God. And then everybody gets uncomfortable in the room, right, when we start saying things like that. But it's just the truth. It's outside of the marriage union. Therefore, it's not glorifying God in the same way that he expects it to glorify. Now, again, There's something lacking. This is just truth. I heard a pastor say this one time, and the first time I heard him say it, I was like, that's a lot. But it's true. There's something lacking in a love that won't declare itself publicly. Okay, let's get Ruth back off the shelf, bring it back, because now we're all uncomfortable and we're all there. So I guess before we continue, use the institutions that are present to glorify God when you're married. That's kind of the expectation. So at the end of it, we get to Ruth chapter 4 at the end in verse 13. In verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. So public declaration, public interaction, and they are married now. And when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, so the women of the town, the women that worked with Boaz, the women that were working with Ruth, they in the town, they said, praise be to God, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, talking about Ruth, who loves you and who is better than you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And then Naomi took the child in her arms and she cared for him. She finally got to be a grandma. That's what she's waited her whole life on. That's what she was wanting from the beginning. I mean, she married Elimelech. She has her 2 sons, and then they get married. In her mind, she's going to be a grandma. And then her husband dies, and then her sons die. And then then Ruth travels with Naomi, and then I'm sure Naomi's like, well, nobody's going to marry the Moabite girl. She wasn't expecting this, but God works in the ordinary moments. And Naomi took the child in her arms and she cared for him. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son. Now you hear that and you go, wait a second, Naomi's not the one that had the kid. Well, that's just the way they spoke in that day when they were talking about grandkids, like grandsons and granddaughters. They would actually add them to the count of their kids. So if you guys have been part of a culture at all, where they actually just call the grandpa, he's not grandpa, he's just dad. Or he's da. This is what they do sometimes. They'll say that. It's because it's part of that culture of like, it's just, you're just another dad. You're my dad, and now I'm your son. That's the way they viewed it in that day and age. So that's why it says that Naomi, and they looked and said, Naomi has a son, because now she has a grandson. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. King David. That in just like one more generation, Israel's going to have a king, and his name's going to be Saul. And when he starts rejecting God, David, as a 15-year-old boy, is going to step onto the pages of history and slay a giant you may have heard of called Goliath. This is in the line of Ruth. This is in the line of Naomi. And then eventually, it would connect to the line of our Messiah, and she would be listed in the genealogy of Jesus. And this provided a future for Ruth. That's what's so powerful here, is because at the time, Ruth and Naomi just figured they would have to sell the property, and then that was it, and they would make ends meet for a period of time. And if you hear Ruth's language in the first part of the book, she's committing long-term to Naomi. She's expecting that she's never going to marry and she's going to stay with Naomi. That's why when Naomi says, hold on, I got a plan. You can go talk to Boaz. It's why she goes, that's a great idea. We should do that, because she was not expecting that whatsoever. If you remember last week, I left it open. I said, last week we learned we got to do the right thing, ... And those of you that hate cliffhangers, you're really mad because I left you like that for a whole week. And maybe you went and you read the book and then you got confused at the sandal slapping. I don't know. But is do the right thing, and you heard me say it's do the right thing according to God's commands, not according to what culture tells you, right? Do the right thing according to what God has said, not what culture is going to tell you. So we're going to do the right thing, and we're able to do the right thing because God's Spirit is inside of us, and He guides us. It's that little bit of consciousness, that says, hey, wait a second, don't say that. You ever had that? You ever had that before? Where you just like your wife says something, and then you're like, whoa, right? And you're like, I'm gonna let her have it. And then you just get that little bit of like, hey, don't say that. Or maybe you're a leader and you're about to handle something a certain way, and you just kind of hear in your spirit that says, don't do that. Or maybe it's a little bit of a nudge of like, hey, do this for them. Care for them in this way. Love them this way. Say this, but don't say that. And you ever wonder what that is? That's God's Spirit inside of you if you're a believer. It's His Spirit inside of you guiding and directing you to do the right thing according to the heart of God. But you still, this is a great thing about free will, you still have the opportunity to say no. So that's why we learned last week that we have to do the right thing. And to finish the sentence and to finish the statement, what we see in chapter 4 is Boaz did the right thing and he trusted God with the outcome. This is the challenge. I could sit up here and I could say, do the right thing, and it's great, and it's cool, and you guys are all for it. Nobody argues we shouldn't do the right thing. The thing that we get hung up on is, am I going to do the right thing? But then you have to let it go and trust God with the outcomes of doing the right thing. So many of us want to control the outcome. But we're not God of outcomes. He is. And so many times we try to control it, right? We're like, I'll do this if I know where it leads. I'm comfortable doing the right thing because I know where it leads. So as long as I can see the destination, I'm good. I'll do the right thing. But the minute I can't see the destination and God's calling me to something, or I'm coming up to a fork in the road and I got to make a decision, this is what culture tells me to do, this is what God tells me to do, and I come to that fork in the road and it's like, okay, culture, I can see it, it plays out this way. With God, I don't know what He's going to do. Because sometimes you don't always get to see the end of the road. When those moments happen is when you have to do the right thing and trust God with the outcomes. Because when you're able to do that, you have a freeing way of living life. Because God's got it all under control. Because the truth is, He still honors righteous character. He still honors righteous character today as He did then. And I've got a story that kind of brings this together a little bit for you guys from my own life. Now, I got out of the Marine Corps in 2017. When I got out, I went right into the church. Different world, right? Like I just came into totally different worlds. I was a grunt and then come in to be a pastor, which was awkward. And then in order to make it work, we had to, I was working full-time, and I was going to college full-time for my Bible degree. And Leah and I, we were pursuing God and living for Him. But we didn't have a lot of money at the time, and we had a really awesome 2011 Ford Escape, right? So this thing was great. Loved it. I actually hated it, but it was a car. And I did so when I got back from my first deployment, my second deployment, I did what every young, stupid Marine does, and I went and got a truck. I got a big truck. I got a real big truck, real big tires, go boom, 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 boom. When you get it going, that's what I got. I got one of those. But I didn't get it from a good dealer. I got it and it turned out to be a lemon. And I'm driving this guy back from SOI because I had to go pick him up in the School of Infantry, and I'm bringing him to my unit. As I'm driving in my unit, a stupid truck just breaks down in the middle of my battalion parking lot. So then, I still owe a loan on the truck, but the truck doesn't run anymore, and it's a total wash. It costs more to repair it than it does to keep it. And then that's when I stopped buying Chevy. But that's why we only drive Fords now. But that's neither here nor there. It's not the sermon. So it broke down, and we got rid of it. And then I ended up buying a Ford Escape. And as we're driving the Ford Escape, we had to roll the money that was left on the truck on top of the Escape, which sucked because there was a lot of money left over, and I only had it for a couple of months. So I didn't really make any payments, and it was a struggle, and it was really, really difficult. And then for a while, we were paying both her car. And my car, the Escape, had a significant payment on it. And so that was tough because we didn't have the money to get right side up on the car. And then we get out of the Marine Corps, and I go into the church, and I'm driving from here to from Fredericksburg up to Maryland all the time. I'm going back and forth, and we were just pursuing God and chasing after what He would have for us, doing the right thing all the time. And then Leah got pregnant for the third time. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a Ford Escape. They don't have a lot of space in the back. Not only did they have not a lot of space in the back, we had 3 under 5, which meant we had car seats and car seats and car seats, just car seats, right? And so Leah starts to do exactly what every good mother does, and she starts playing Tetris with the car seats in the back of the car. And so she's like, well, and she starts looking up ways to take the oldest and move him into a thinner one so that the baby, because the smaller the baby, the bigger the car seat. That's a general rule. So is the oldest, we can get him in a smaller car seat. So she's playing Tetris and looking online and watching YouTube videos of a mom buckling, unbuckling things, like showing them all this thing. Because we know that we can't afford that third row seating. And we need it because, we're going to have to stuff everybody in there. Or we can take 2 cars everywhere, and that's expensive because, like I said, we weren't making a lot of money at the time. And so we were just in this situation where we were kind of stuck. But we just said, hey, you know what? We're just going to keep doing right things, and we're going to trust God that he's going to provide some way. We just don't know how. And so we were in a place, couldn't afford a new car, still upside down, finally got the escape to a place where it was right about even. Maybe we were even on top of it just a little bit because we kept paying. We started doing the debt snowball thing and really tackling that debt. And then I'm driving back home one day, and I go through the King George intersection there with like the one light, and I'm coming through and see only light there. And a guy comes screaming by at 45 miles an hour and rear ends the back of my Escape. Sends me out into the intersection, which I'm very happy we didn't have kids in that vehicle because he hit me at 45 miles an hour, totaled the vehicle, and the airbags didn't deploy. Wasn't very, needless to say, I'm happy that's not the vehicle anymore. So it sends it out, totals the vehicle, right? But really, I felt bad for him. He was the one that really made out bad because he actually crashed into me with his wife's brand new car. It had the temp sticker on. It was still there. It wasn't even real tags yet. They were the just bought tags within 30 days. And he had just bought it, and it was like a Audi or something. It was an expensive car. I didn't even know what brand it was. It was so expensive. And it slammed into the back of mine, totally ruined his car, the whole deal. And then when he told me, he's like, it's actually my wife's car. I was like, oh, let me pray for you. And I grabbed a hold of him and prayed for him before he called her because it was like, whoo, man. Yeah, his obituary was up a week later. They asked me to do his funeral after that. No, I'm kidding. Never saw him after that. Maybe I should check on him. But he goes, and I'm fine. Like, I'm not injured at all. And Leah comes and picks me up, and then we start really wrestling with, oh, my goodness, we don't have a car anymore. And sure enough, it comes back totaled. We knew that. The axle was hanging off. So, it comes back totaled. And we're like, man, we don't have enough money in the bank to purchase another car. Because we couldn't afford the payment, we had to put a significant down payment to be able to afford the payment. So we're looking and we're trying to figure things out at that point. We're cutting where we need to cut. We're just in a hard spot. And then we actually received the back pay for an injury that I got in the Marine Corps from the VA. And this is why I don't believe in coincidences, is because it hit the week before we needed to buy the car. The week before we needed to buy the car, the back pay hit. And it was like 6 months of back pay. So we had 6 months of back pay, which equaled out to just the right amount to where we had enough for a down payment to afford that sick man van I drive around now. It's a gem. I'm riding that thing till the wheels fall off. We paid it off. I own it. It's mine. I love it. Sticker man van on the back, right? But that's why I don't believe it. That's why I don't believe in circumstances. It was God working in the ordinary to provide for us. I didn't get hurt in the accident at all, right? Because I'm built different. No, because God was with us, and he was with me and working through the process, right? So it was there. I'm serious. It was there. I know I don't seem serious very much, but he was working in the ordinary, and he was working in those times that we couldn't see him in the background. And it was because, and you know what? We resolved ourselves years before that to just, hey, we are going to do the right thing. And we even talk about it. We're going to do the right thing, and we're going to trust God with how it turns out. Even though it might cost us something at the upfront, it might cost us some situations with secular friends, or it might cost us with some people that we're close with. It might cost us professionally. If it comes down to doing the right thing according to what God says, we are going to do the right thing. We're going to trust God with the outcomes. And I've seen the Lord provide time and time again. Not the way I would have. I would have much rather him just send me all the money and take the car off of it, and then I don't have to get in a car crash and go through all the insurance and all that. But I'm not complaining. His way is better. And I just trust him. And I just know that he's there working in the ordinary. So the truth is, he still honors righteous character. He still honors righteous character. And if you're in a spot in your life, and if you're not right now, you will be, where you're going to hit a place where you're going to be faced with that fork in the road. You're going to have the way the world wants you to do something, the way the world wants you to react to something, the way things around you and people around you want you to behave, and then you're going to be faced square up with what God says about it. And in those moments, in those times, you have to make a decision. You may not always see the end of the road if you choose to go down God's path. And in fact, sometimes he doesn't let you see the road just to see if you'll take a step. And you go, Brandon, what's that all about? I don't know. It's a longer sermon. But sometimes he does that to get you to take the first step. And sometimes this going down the side that the world says to go down, it seems better. There's times it seems better. There's times it seems more beneficial. There's times it seems that it's going to turn out better for you. But in order to get there, you got to do the wrong thing. You got to hurt somebody, right? You got to hurt somebody emotionally, physically, or maybe mentally. You've got to decide to not do what God says to get there. And if you can get to that place, you're going to look back and you're going to realize you're still in Moab, that you never left. But if you could get to a place, and this is the challenging part, when you hit that fork in the road, that you look down that road and you can't really see, it's like the end, and you're like, I don't know where it's going to lead, but God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do the right thing as a husband. I'm going to do the right thing as a father. I'm going to do the right thing as a leader. I'm going to do the right thing as a friend. I'm going to do the right thing as a boyfriend or as a girlfriend. And I'm going to trust you with the outcomes. Now that means that you might have to change the way you're living right now. That means you may have to redefine some relationships that you're in. That means you might have to have some honest conversations with the people around you. That means you may have to change the way you handle your money. That means you may have to change the way you handle yourself at work. That you need to change the way you lead people. That might mean you need to change the way you parent your kids. That might mean that you need to change and actually marry her or maybe marry him. Maybe that means that you need to take a step and say, you know what, I'm going to remove the selfish attitude from my life and I'm going to put an others first attitude. Maybe that means that I'm going to take away this manipulative attitude that I've had of what can I get where it's all about me. I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to make it more about them. And this is so uncomfortable and I understand it. And this is such a challenge and I get it. But the truth is I've tried it the other ways. And life is just better when you do the right thing and you trust God with the outcomes, because he still honors righteous living. So my question or my thought and the thing you've got to wrestle to the ground is, are you ready to make that next right decision when it comes? You might not be at a crossroads today. Maybe you're going to be at one in a couple months. But you'll be at one soon. And when you come to one, have you resolved yourself to be a person of character the way Boaz and Ruth were? That you are going to do the right thing regardless of the circumstances. You're going to do the right thing and trust God with the outcomes. Don't make that decision that day. Make that decision in here. Make that decision beforehand. And that way when it comes, you go, oh no, I don't do that. That's just not me. I do the right thing and I trust God with the outcomes. That's what I do. And your life will be better because he still honors righteous living. So, with that, I would love to pray with you. Heavenly Father, this is challenging for us at times. This is so challenging because it's just like chapter 1, that it's calling us to be better versions of ourselves. It's calling us to be the versions of us that you see us becoming. So, Father, I pray that we would be comfortable enough to say right now, we're going to do the right thing regardless of the circumstances, and then we're going to trust you with the outcomes. Because you already know where it's going. You started a good work in us, Lord, and we know that you have our best interests at heart. And they may not be the situation we want it to be, but ultimately, if it's you, we want it. So, Father, I pray that for many of us that are coming up to one of those crossroads, that just like Boaz, we would do the right thing and trust you with the outcomes and not live this way anymore. This is challenging. Holy Spirit, I pray that you would speak to us, that you would guide us, that you would direct us, that you would nudge us along the path of right things. Lord, we love you and we praise you in this place. And the church said, amen.